Welcome back to Unfiltered. I see that smile, Allison. You must have loved the intro.
I do.
Thank you. So, as we said, we're going to continue to keep bringing life experiences of all different walks from men, women, all different nationalities. And today we have Allison Roberts. She has a phenomenal testimony starting back to her childhood. And of course, I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Allison, welcome to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you. It is an absolute honor to be here. My name is Allyson Roberts. I am a TEDx speaker and a TEDx facilitator. I own the company Unapologetic Power. I came up with a system called personalized science that combines the science of the brain and spirituality so that you can become your best, most beautiful self. And I work with both men and women, and I absolutely love what I do.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, thank you for the great introduction. But we always like to start at the beginning, in a sense. The origin of things. So, how was life for you growing up? What was home life like?
In a word, it was hell. That's the best word I can use to describe it. I was born in 1965, and therapy and counseling and all of that were just not pushed or even really talked about. And so, unfortunately, my mom, who was just very hurt, really inflicted a lot of her pain onto myself and my siblings. And when I was 10 years old, my parents divorced. My siblings all moved out of the house all at the same time. So I went from a house of 6 people to a house of 2 people. And unfortunately, those 2 people were my mother, who was the abuser, and myself. And so she didn't have 4 other people to pour her pain into. All of that came in my direction. So it was pretty horrific.
Wow. So, your other siblings, I have, I guess, 2 questions. Your other siblings, did they go with your dad?
Well, my sisters were old enough to move out and, go to college. And one went to college, one got married, and then my brother lived with my father.
Okay. So, can you tell us some of the traumas that you went through as a child from your mom?
Yeah. So, I'll tell you some of the things that I found out in my adulthood that were going on. That as a little kid, you don't know what's happening. So, first of all, my dad fought for custody of me, and on the way to the courthouse, my mother told me that if I told the judge that I wanted to live with my dad, that I would never see my siblings again. That she would make sure that I never saw them again, and that if she did have custody or visitation of me, that she would that I would regret it, that I would pay for it. And so I had already told my dad that I was going to, because it was a jury trial, and as a 10-year-old little girl, they made me get up on the stand and tell this courtroom full of people who I wanted to live with. Traumatizing. It's traumatizing. Um, so I had already told my dad that I was going to tell the court that I wanted to live with him. And my mother knew that. And so she knew exactly what to say to me. She knew the tone to use and everything. And I was so paralyzed with fear and so terrorized that when the judge asked me, which parent I wanted to live with, I was silent. It was probably only for a minute or two, but in my little world, it felt like I was, silent for hours. And my mother just gave me this glare, and I ended up saying that I wanted to live with her, and my dad was just completely destroyed. Um, And there's a backstory to that too that we can talk about. But I think for the purposes of right now, it's really important to understand that the children, first of all, should never be put in that situation. It's just horrible. But then the other thing that she did that I didn't know she was doing until I was an adult was my dad had custody of me, or visitation, every other weekend. And so I would pack my suitcase and be so excited to see him. And she would tell me that he was on his way, and I would go outside and sit on our front porch. And as soon as I went outside, she would call my dad and tell him that I didn't want to see him. So there were so many Friday nights that I fell asleep on our front porch waiting for my dad to pick me up. And he never showed up. So that kind of like twisted, narcissistic, mental abuse, it's really, it tangles such a dark web inside of your brain that you of one where you just feel like you are completely worthless, like there's something horribly wrong with you. What parent doesn't want to come and like pick up their kid for visitation, right? And so just the stories that I started to tell myself really tainted the rest of my childhood, and really seriously like into my adulthood too.
I can imagine, because that's that's insane. And I'm sorry you had to go through that, because that's, you don't even really kind of like understand what's going on enough to defend yourself in a sense. So where at any point, or what was the point, were you able to, tell your dad what was actually like happening? Have you ever had that conversation with him?
Yeah. So my dad, when I was an adult, we rebuilt our relationship. And then something else happened when I'll share with you ladies, and you're going to just be like, what? Um, but anyway, I rebuilt my relationship with him in my 30s. And um, I just remember we were sitting on his back porch one night, and I was like, Dad, I need to ask you something. And he was like, you can ask me anything. I'm an open book. And I was like, why didn't you ever come and like get me for your visitation? Like, why didn't you come pick me up? And he was like, because you didn't want to see me. And I was like, that is not true. That's not true. And then we figured out, what was happening with my mother. And then one of my sisters confirmed it. My oldest sister confirmed that that's exactly what was going on. And I mean, the level of hatred that you feel in your body when you realize that someone can be that evil to you, it's like indescribable. I mean, my poor dad, he lived out in the country, and I got off the porch, I was just pacing back and forth. I was cussing and screaming at the top of my lungs, and I was, cursing God. And I'm just like, what the actual is happening? Like I was so mad. And my dad was just like, breathe, calm down, breathe, calm down. It was 25 years ago. Like, catch your breath. It's okay. It's okay. But when you're betrayed on that level, it's just like you understand why people hurt each other, honestly. Like, I'm really glad she wasn't there. I mean, I would never like physically put my hands on her, but it makes you a little crazy momentarily. It really does.
Oh, and this is unfiltered, unspoken, so you can say whatever you want. We don't filter. So I just want to let you know that too, as well. I have a question. So, did your siblings ever try to, like, come take you out, be there for you? Were you ever able to vent to them? Did they know what you were going through?
My siblings are an interesting case. So, yes and no, but my siblings were afraid of me, and I'm going to tell you why. So, When I was 42 years old, my oldest sister is an alcoholic. She's in recovery now, but at the time she wasn't. And she lives in Hawaii, and she was arrested for a felony DUI. And so my dad, because at the time I was kind of the anchor of the family, like I would give our family members money and like get on a plane and go do anything and everything for anybody. I was just like people pleasing horribly. And so my dad called me and was like, we need you, and I need you to go to Hawaii. I need you to go help your sister. Like, this is super important. So I flew to Hawaii with, at the time, was my 15-year-old daughter. And I helped my sister, like, basically piece her life back together again. And the night before, or the morning that of the day before I was supposed to come home, my sister and I, now my sister is 10 years older than me. Okay. So when I was 5, she was 15. She was already drunk. She was already like drunk all the time. She was high functioning drunk. She was on the honor roll. She was a captain of her cheerleader team. She was on gymnastic team, the swim team. She graduated. I mean, she just like on and on, this overachieving alcoholic, right? So when I was 20, she was 30, and so on and so forth. So I never really had a relationship with her because we were just in two different worlds. But in addition to that, she was too drunk to have a relationship with anybody. So my very first like meaningful conversation with her was when I was 42 years old, the morning before I got on a plane to fly back to Georgia. We are sitting on the beach, and my sister asked me, does it bother you that we are half siblings? And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, oh, never mind. I thought you knew. So for a half second, I thought she meant that her dad was different from our dad. And then she said, you know, you have a different dad. Dad's not really your dad. And like, when I tell you everybody knew but me, like everybody knew, everybody, like all of our friends, the teachers, the principal of the schools, like like my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, like every single person in my world knew that I was not my dad's kid except for me. And that does something to you too. So I had just like, so my dad and I had that conversation about my mom not picking me up from, you know, my dad not picking me up from my mom's, like when I was like 35 or 36. And then I got back into therapy, put myself back together again. And so I had really just had like 4 years of what I would call just like, wee, you know, nothing major going on. I'm thinking like life is really good again. This is amazing. And then wham. And it just changed the trajectory of my whole entire life. It changed my dad and I's relationship. It changed everything because, again, to be betrayed on that level it's just indescribable.
See, I know you about to ask the same question I'm about to ask.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
We about to find out.
Maybe not. I mean, I don't know. Was that like a tie-in to like the cause of the end of their relationship, your parents?
No,
Are
no,
you're the youngest though, correct?
I'm the youngest. Yeah.
Okay. And then, and then I guess which one were you more mad at? Like, you know, I personally, my dad, I probably wouldn't have had too much anger there just because it's, you know, commendable. And then they, you know, that he fought for you. You
Right.
never really had to like question. He really could have just been like, you know, to hell with this crazy lady and her child. Like, you know what I mean? I probably would have let that slide, but mom,
Yeah.
please.
And that's really kind of where I was, honestly. It's just the thing about my dad is, and he passed away in 2017. And as crazy as this is going to sound, he and I are really close now. I know that sounds really weird to say, but I talk to him every single day, and he talks to me like every day, and we are very, very tight now. But the thing that bothered me is that he wouldn't talk to me about it. And everybody in my family was just like, nothing's changed. We don't understand what your problem is. And I'm like, nothing's changed for you, but everything, everything changed for me, especially when I found out that my biological father was the minister of one of the largest churches in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. And I was conceived in his church office. And yeah, yes, ma'am. And just that, that whole thing, it just really, it was a clusterfuck. I mean, it turns you inside out.
So, did you confront your mother, and when you confronted your non-biological dad that you thought was your dad, did y'all have a fallout? Did you distance from each other? Because I know you said in the end that y'all talked. Did your biological dad pass? Did you ever have a relationship with him?
Yeah, he, so I found my biological father, shortly after I found out that he was my father. And well, first of all, just anybody, y'all need to just sit down. So y'all need to sit down, and you need to like make sure you don't have any liquid in your mouth. So my dad told me, yes, I know. And your father is this man over here. So I was like, cool. So I found that man, and I knocked on his door the day after Christmas, and he opened the door because I'm bold. He opened the door, and I said, do you know who I am? And he said, yes, I know exactly who you are. And I was like, so you're my father? And he was like, no, I'm not your father. So my mother was having an affair with him while she was pregnant with me. And my dad shot him. My dad shot him, and he lived through it. But my mom got pregnant by another, they were both ministers. My mom got pregnant by another minister and then started sleeping with that dude. So my dad, my adopted dad for 42 years thought that he shot my father, my biological father. And he found out, as just like he found out the same day that I found out that my father was somebody completely different. I told y'all to sit down.
So did you find the right person after that?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did that?
I mean, Jerry Springer has nothing on me.
So did he admit to being your dad? Did he know he?
He knew who I was. He admitted to being my father, but he also told me that he was going to have someone hurt me horribly if I ever showed up around him again. That I was not allowed to meet my siblings, that I was not allowed to have a relationship with him. And now he's like the head of a big church at the time, head of a big church in South Carolina. So I stepped out of his life for about 10 years, I guess. And then my daughter, who's an adult, not the baby I placed for adoption. This is my daughter. She ordered or wanted a DNA test for Christmas 6 years ago. So when the DNA test came back, of course, the family who we're biologically connected with, there were members there in the test. And so it was confirmed that this minister of this big churches is actually really my biological father. And he passed away from COVID in 2021. But I did see him right before he died, and I was able to tell him that I told him that I choose to forgive him because I choose to be that free. But that I felt really sorry for him, because I do, to just live that life of so many lies. And just, I do believe that, I don't necessarily believe in like a heaven and a hell, but I do believe that there is karma on the other side. And I feel sorry for him, because I feel like he's having to face a lot of things right now.
So did and you're probably gonna we probably say, so do you know your siblings now? Did you ever confront the wife? Or he's trying to cover, I know he was trying to cover adultery.
Yeah, so they were heartbroken and devastated because they didn't know anything about me, and they're all in their 50s and 60s, because I am the baby of all of them. So there are 9 of us. When you put my siblings, I'm the baby of 9 children. And so they had no idea that their dad had cheated. They had no idea that I existed. They didn't know anything. And so, it's hard to build a relationship when it starts out that way, and I was open to building a relationship with them, but what you see with me is what you get. I mean, I don't put on airs. I don't play games. I don't behave. I am just Allyson, and they couldn't handle it, because they grew up in my biological mother is narcissistic, and my biological father is narcissistic. And I asked my therapist when all this was going on, like, am I a narcissist? And she's like, if you have to ask the question, you're not. But when you have 2 narcissistic parents, you start to wonder, like, oh my God, am I also like a monster? I was really starting to wonder if I'm just like crazy. And I've taken all the tests. I'm pretty sane. But it just, their reality was, his children's reality is exactly what he wanted their reality to be. And so they still, even though he did, and having an affair with my mother is not the only horrible thing that he did, but I'm not going to get into it on the podcast. It's horrific. They still, with all of this knowledge, worship the absolute ground that he walked on, and they refuse to see, like, I am the problem. He's perfect, and I'm the problem. I mean, that is how they kind of view it, and I'm not available for that game.
Yeah, it says, you don't have to say it. I think we almost know what it is, Sid. So you don't have to say it at all. We'll try later. We know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the $1 million question. What say your mother of all of this, of everything that, as you were learning it stage by stage, like, did, what what does she have to say for herself, if anything?
That I'm an ungrateful little bitch that needs to understand all the sacrifices that she made for me, and I need to get over it. And why can't I just understand that she was the victim, and that she's always been the victim, she'll always be the victim, and that I'm an entitled bitch, basically.
What? No, she didn't.
Oh, yes, ma'am. More than once. That I'm a drama queen. I like to stir up problems, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So
And that's what a narcissist does, though. When, like, if you don't play a narcissist game, you become the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm assuming you and your mother don't have a relationship.
Oh no, 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 no.
Okay. Okay. So I want to chime because you end up becoming homeless and pregnant. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I show my book? Cool. So I wrote about it. It's called The Spiritual Journey, the part no one talks about. It's a self-help book. So at the end of each chapter, you get to like work on your own stuff, which is kind of cool. But yeah, what a heartbreaking story that actually turned into the most beautiful miracles ever. So my senior year of high school, I started to realize that if I stayed in my mother's house for any significant amount of time, that I was going to lose my mind. It was getting like really, really bad, and I kept it a really big secret. There was one teacher at school who knew what was going on at home, and she was amazing, incredible. Other than that, I really had no other adult to turn to for any kind of guidance or help or anything. And so when I graduated from high school, I enrolled in a local college, and I was living with a friend one week, another friend another week, another friend another week, as long as they're, to the extent that their parents would be like, Allyson can't, she just can't stay on the couch anymore. She has to go. And I did that for a while. And then I would go back home to my mom when I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I would stay there for a couple of weeks, and then I would find another place to stay. So I call that homelessness. There's just the only way I can describe it. But then I met a boy. It's always about a boy. And I met a boy, and well, he was actually a man. I was 18 and he was 27. And we fell in love very quickly. It was probably, in all honesty, a trauma bond. But we ended up not getting married. We ended up living together, and we were engaged to be married. And my pregnancy test was positive. And at first, he and I were just like so excited. To my surprise, I thought he was going to be really upset about it, but he wasn't at all. He really surprised me. And so we made the mistake of telling his parents, and his father wrote me a check and told me that I was going to have an abortion. Now, I want to say that I am pro-choice. I totally believe that women have the right to make a choice for themselves. With that being said, the pregnancy was not a mistake. Like the timing was a mistake, but we had already talked about like having kids, and we wanted a lot of kids. We wanted like 5 or 6 kids. So we weren't that upset about it. But his dad was like, absolutely not. This is not happening right now. And so I went to the abortion clinic, and I was getting ready to be put to sleep. And I pulled the IV out of my arm, and I got up, and I was hysterical. And I went home, and I lied to my fiance and told him that I was still pregnant, which was horrible to do. And then a couple of weeks later, the morning sickness set in, and he came into the bathroom when I was just like puking my guts out everywhere. And he was like, I hate that you lied to me, but we're going to figure this out, and it's okay. I really think if I hadn't lied to him, that we probably could have figured it out, but because I made the mistake of betraying him like that, he just couldn't deal with it. So when I got home from class that night, he and his dad had changed the locks on the house that my fiance and I lived in. And my stuff was outside in garbage bags and boxes. So I drove a little 1978 Volkswagen Beetle, and I put as much stuff in my car as I could. And then I went to a payphone, because this is before cell phones. I went to a payphone, and I stood there for the longest time, just pacing back and forth. Should I call my mom? Not call my mom, call my mom, not call my mom. So anyway, I ended up calling my mother, and I told her that, our engagement was off and all of that. I didn't tell her anything else that was going on. So I moved back home, and then my mother heard me vomiting a couple of mornings, and she figured out that I was pregnant. And she did the exact same thing. She told me that I was going to have an abortion, and I told her that I had already been down that road and I wasn't going to do it because this baby was conceived in love. And when I got home from school that night, she had changed the locks on the doors, except this time, everything that I owned was inside the house and not outside the house. So people think that it doesn't get cold in Atlanta, Georgia. It gets very cold. So it's freezing cold outside. I sat in my car for like an hour, just screaming, cussing, screaming at God, screaming at my parents. And I do want to say that I could not go and live with my father because during all of this, he was in active alcoholism. And I just couldn't be around it. So I got calm in my car. I calmed myself down. And at the young age of 19, I heard this voice in my head that said, go back to campus, park in the garage, go to sleep. So I drove back to campus, parked in the parking garage. When I didn't go to sleep, but I was sitting in my car. I had $1.79 to my name. I had half an English muffin from McDonald's and the clothes on my back and my books and a book bag. And that is what I owned. And a blanket. I did have a blanket in the backseat of my car. Those were the possessions that I owned. And so weeks later, I was still living in my car, still wearing the same clothes every single day, still going to class. I smelled. I had mustard stains on my shirt. I was growing out of the pants that I was wearing. And a professor that was a substitute teacher, I guess he just noticed this little kid that was pregnant and tying her pants together with rubber bands, and dirty and smelly, coming to class and sitting in the library every night until they kicked me out. And I was actually eating out of trash cans and peeing in the parking garage. Being homeless is not fun. So I had a suicide plan. I was going to jump off the roof of the parking garage. It was 7 stories, and I was pretty sure I wouldn't survive it. So I was getting closer and closer and closer to killing myself. And I was sitting in the library one night, and the professor walked up to me with the book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he said, Allyson, I don't know what's going on with you, but I think you could use this. Now, I tell this story because there's no way in hell that I would have read that book at the age of 19 had I not been homeless and living in my car. But I didn't really have anything else to do, and I was pretty desperate. So I started reading the book, and the book is all about, it's not about money. The rich is about ourselves. It's about our worth. It's about our self-worth, our self-esteem, our plan, our goals. And one of the things that the book said is like, basically just start where you are. And the other thing that was just like, take a moral inventory of your life. Like, look at where you are. Like, you, on some level, you created the situation that you're in right now. And that's when I took radical responsibility for lying, for taking my birth control pills, for being, irresponsible in that department as well. And I started visualizing being out of that car, and the same professor who gave me the book, he and his wife rescued me from my car. exactly 10 days later.
I
That's
have
that's
tears in
crazy
my
how things
eyes.
work. Yeah, that is very crazy how things work.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that though. That's wonderful to hear. How long, were you? I don't know if you stayed with them or they just kind of helped you find, residence elsewhere. But, how long was that period between them helping you out and you actually being on your feet?
Between them helping me and me being back on my feet again, it took about 4 years, honestly. But I stayed with them for 3 days. And then Catholic Social Services stepped in, and I started living with another family. I ended up placing my son for adoption, and that's a whole nother podcast probably. But in a very quick nutshell, um, my son was born with some physical disabilities, and I didn't want to place him for adoption, even though I had already like picked his parents and selected everything. It was a closed adoption. So I knew that when I walked out of the hospital, I would never have any other information about him ever again for the rest of my life. And that was just so overwhelming to think about. I did not want to leave him. And I was crying on the floor in my hospital room. And the same voice that had told me to go to the parking garage told me, if you sign the papers, Allyson, you will see him again. And that's pretty impossible with closed adoption, but I believed it. I really did. And so 24 years later, um, I was woken in the middle of the night, and that same voice was like, it's time. And so the next morning, I contacted Catholic Social Services and told them that I wanted to start the search for my son. And when I told her that it was a closed adoption that had happened in 1985, she was just like, Miss Allyson, I'm so sorry, but this is going to take, a long time. I mean, like, you're not going to see him for probably a decade or two. But, do you still want to do it? And I was like, yeah, I want to do it. And so she faxed me the paperwork. I filled it all out. The next morning, I faxed the paperwork in. And at 12 o'clock that same day, she called me. My son and I faxed our paperwork in at the exact same time to find each other. We were standing in front of each other 4 days later.
Oh my God, that is a testimony.
Right?
That is a testimony.
It
I
really
really
is.
want to know how did the reconnection go?
Reunion. Yeah, how was everything?
Yeah.
We are definitely soulmates. You know, it's hard to, adoption is complicated. It's complicated. And, we're Facebook friends. We talk through Facebook and texting. I haven't seen him in 10 years, but that wasn't the promise. The promise wasn't, Allyson, you will have a relationship with him. The promise was that I would see him again. And I'm okay with that promise. Like, I'm okay with it. I understand it on a really deep, soulful level, exactly what's going on. And he does too, which is really the most important part, is that he understands it. And we're good with it. We really are. We're good with it.
Now, did in the process of the adoption, did you have to get, your ex fiance involved? Like, did he have to, how was that? Any communication after them putting you out? How did that go?
Catholic Social Services reached out to him, and he went through the whole process. I didn't have to see him or communicate with him at all.
So did y'all ever talk again after the fact, or?
No. He reached out to me on Facebook the very first year that Facebook ever started, and he's been through it. He's been through it, and he apologized, for everything, and I accepted it, because I'm not. I forgave him a long time ago. I had to forgive him before our son was even born, because I was just. My therapist was, she was really amazing, and she just kept saying, like, the more you hate him, you're really just hating yourself, and if you, the day that you can just decide, like, I choose to forgive you, she's like, you're going to stop hating yourself. And she was right, because I did.
That's great. Well, not great that you went through it, but
Yeah, no, I feel you. Yeah.
um, it looks like everybody came out on the other side. But um, you know, um, I guess moving on from the adoption. Clearly you talk about another child that you had. Kind of walking into a new life and things like that. So, what was kind of the next step after um, the adoption and getting yourself back in place after being homeless? What was the next phase for you?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, my gynecologist had a very serious conversation with my mother, when she came to the hospital, because she showed up at the hospital, and it's a long story how she figured out where I was, but she showed up at the hospital, like, we need to keep the baby, and I'm going to make you a nursery, and it's going to be amazing. And she was kind of put in her place by professionals, just saying, like, you don't get to do this. This is not fair at all. And that gave me strength. I had never, ever in my life had someone stand up for me like that to my mother. And the world didn't end, you know. And I realized that she was just all talk, really. Like, I mean, she could slap me and hit me, but she was not going to do that at the age of 20. I would, and so I reached out to her, and I set some very, very strong boundaries. I was like, I am coming back to your house to live. You owe that to me. And this is how it's going to go down. Like, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be working a lot. You're not going to talk to me. We're not going to have, I just, like, laid it out for her. To her credit, um, she, and I found out years later that she didn't really do this, but believe it or not, she contacted my biological father and told him that I had just gone through all of that. And so he wrote her a check to buy me a car. She was emotionally blackmailing him. Anytime she needed money, she would emotionally blackmail my biological father. So, she bought me a car. She bought me new clothes, because I was under so much stress with the pregnancy with my son. I actually gained 100 pounds after I wasn't homeless anymore. I was also starving. So I think I just, like, let it all get the best of me. So, she, in her weird way, was trying to help me. I think she wanted credit, but she was trying to help me, like, get it back together. So I lived with her for 2.5 years, and then I was working 2 jobs, and then I got my own apartment, and I moved out, and I've never lived with her since. And then I met my husband, and then my daughter was born. And it's been a really interesting journey of self-discovery in this lifetime. I'll just say that.
You've really been through it, and to be sitting here and you're so beautiful.
Oh, thank
You
you.
never know, and I always tell people, you never know what the person next to you has been through. And you're one of those folks, I would never look at you and be like, she's been through all of this. But it sounds like to me your mother had a lot of guilt without apologizing. So
Yeah.
the blackmailing your dad and allowing you to stay there, and not, it sounds like a lot of guilt, and maybe she had an epiphany somewhere. But I wanted to ask, in the hospital when they confronted her, what was her reaction? Um, I know narcissistic behavior, so I can only imagine her response.
She kind of laughed and was just kind of like, took the stance of that she was half kidding, like, oh, I was just kidding, blah, 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 instead of like owning. I mean, they don't own anything. So, and like after she left, my doctor came back in the room, a couple of nurses came back in, and they were just, are you okay? Are you going to be all right? And I had already been in therapy then, because it was a requirement through Catholic Social Services. So I had already been in like extensive therapy for 5 months. And that was the therapist who made me answer like a lot of like assessments and everything. And she's like, oh, your mother's a narcissist. Like, no wonder you have PTSD. No wonder you didn't feel like you could live at home. Like, no wonder you would rather live in your car than break into the house and try to reason with her, And so it her reaction to everything is always either well underplayed or just ignored.
Sorry, missing my mic. But what did I want to ask? I completely lost it. That's crazy. Uh, um, let's see. Oh, I guess with you've kind of been in and out of therapy through the years, through your different scenarios. What is actually advised if you did meet this topic? After going through so much, and whether dating or actually in a committed relationship, do they advise that you fully open up about those things, or like keep keep it with your therapist? Because some people I know, you can list everything that's happened to you, and it's almost a blueprint to get them to do it all over again. And what kind of triggers it, just they use that information negatively. So I guess for you and what you were advised, how was it trying to get back into the game, or open yourself up enough to be in a healthy relationship?
That is such a great question, Sid. Therapy has evolved over time. And 30 years ago, it was like, oh, you need to share it all. Like you don't want to have secrets, like lay it out on the, all out on the table. The problem with that is that what you just said, is that you're giving someone ammunition to kind of hurt you again. But the other big red flag is trauma bonding. And so now therapists will say that you don't share everything. Um, you share it over time, after you, like, once you've made a healthy establishment and laid a solid foundation, then you can share a piece of something, and then kind of test the waters a little bit and see if like behavior from that other, and this is not just with sexual and romantic partners, but this is also like with friends or anybody that you are trying to develop a relationship with, because trauma bonding is really prevalent in our society, and it's gotten even worse since COVID. Even though COVID is officially over, people can really get bitch, like, it blows my mind, honestly, how much trauma bonding I see in the relationships that are around me. I mean, I'm constantly telling my clients and other people, like, whoa, Nelly, like, you got to put the brakes on that, because you are like, you're telling way too much, way, way, way too soon. So I love that you asked that question.
Yeah, and if you look at my posts, I talk about trauma bonding a lot. How
Yes, you
trauma
do.
bond. I do, but I'm glad that you brought that up as well because trauma bonding is serious. And if folks don't know, you're going through traumas in your life and you're connecting with other people with traumas in your life. And sometimes people feed off it. Sometimes it can be good and sometimes it can be bad because some situations with trauma bonding, folks actually help each other heal.
Right.
But majority of the time, it's someone's going to try to destroy someone. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I just want to know, how are you doing today? Like how are you mentally today from everything that you have been through?
I am the best I've ever been in my entire life. I really am. I'm in a place in my life where I understand that my self-worth is not going to come from anyone else. I understand that more success, more money, is not going to make me feel, any worthier than I'm capable of feeling in any given moment. Um, I love the clients that I'm working with. I love my little family. We're doing amazingly well, and I honestly I'm single by choice right now, and I'm doing really, really well, really well.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And um, we, well, I always always like to ask at the end about the projects you have going on in your books and whatnot. However, what point in your kind of healing journey or moving into your new kind of phase of life did you pick up the writing? And when did you get started and everything? And what was kind of the spark that got you there?
So I've been writing my whole life, um, and I started writing professionally 10 years ago, and I just I wrote something and then I sent it to a publisher friend of mine, and I was like, "What do you think of this?" And she was like, it's really heavy. You need to like go back in and like water this down a little bit. But she's like, but your writing is incredible. Like she's like, you're a great writer. So I have this solo book that I did, but I also do book collaborations with my clients every year. And that series is called Behind the Power, and this is the fourth year that we're doing that. And the books get released every September, so that'll be out pretty soon, and that's really exciting. I just did my TEDx talk a couple of months ago, and I'm now a TEDx facilitator, so I'll be holding my first TEDx event in May, and then I have a live event coming up in Atlanta in October. You ladies should come. Seriously, you should come and be in my audience. I would love to have you with me.
I would love to come. I would love to be there.
Yeah, it's so empowering. I mean, you come in one person and you leave just on fire to go and just do whatever dream you want. I mean, you just leave there going, I'm going to do this, and I got it. And it's a great, great, great 3 days to spend together.
Demetria, before I get into the shameless plug, do you want to ask um,
Mhm.
your standard?
Yep. Can you give the audience advice? Maybe we have a few more minutes. Two things on ways to help them heal, to start that journey to healing, or how you heal would help you through your journey.
Yeah, I love this question so much. I really do. So, the very first thing is to look at the results that you are getting in your life right now. And if you're not getting the result that you want, there is a reason for that. And it's not anything outside of yourself. And this is not blame. This is just awareness. So that's the very first thing. Like, how far are you away from your goals, from your dreams, and what's happening in that? The second thing is to have loads of self compassion for the fact that you haven't reached your goal yet or your dream yet, because most of us walk around in shame, and that's only going to keep you further away from what it is that you want. So have compassion with yourself. And I promise you, if you just devote like 15 or 20 minutes to that every single day for like 2 weeks, these inspired ideas are going to start coming to you. You'll either feel them in your body, or there'll be ideas that you hear in your mind. And if you follow those ideas and stay on that path, you're going to start seeing major, major changes in your life.
Great advice.
We are on the same page.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so this is the part we like to call shameless plug. You gave us a little bit about your, books and things that you have coming out, but we do have your banner scrolling across the bottom. Just let the viewers know where they can contact you, utilize your services, buy your books, get tickets to your events, anything. This stage is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. So definitely go to the link tree because everything is there. But if you're like, what's a link tree? Just go to AllysonRoberts.com, ALLYSON Roberts.com. You can email me from there. You can, all the links for everything at the bottom of my website.
Perfect. Allison, Sid, is there anything else you want to say to Allison before we wrap it up?
Sorry, I was on mute. Not necessarily, but just peace to you. You are, you don't, yeah, nothing like what you've been through. I'd personally probably be in a loony bin with all of that, and it's wonderful that you're standing and able to get people through some stuff. Man, you've been through some stuff, and it's very commendable. So thank you for being here and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sid.
Yes. So we want to thank you, Allison, for being a guest on Unfiltered, Unspoken. And as we continue to grow our platform and, to continue to get powerful folks to come on our platform, because every life experience is powerful. We want to thank you, and it was an honor to have you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Um, I want to thank everyone for tuning into Unfiltered Unspoken podcast. Again, we are going to continue to share life experiences of others to help others in hopes they will connect with someone's life experience. And if you was not listening, Allison has been through some traumas, and out of it all, she still sits. She remains to smile. Allison went through childhood traumas of abuse, misleading information, pregnancy, homelessness, having to give her child up for adoption, and coming back and going to school while homeless and coming back, and look at her now. So she is a testimony of how your life can change. And as she mentioned, trauma bonding is real. So pay attention. People actually gravitate to people because of their own personal trauma. So be careful, as she mentioned, of the information that you're giving out in your relationship. Gradually give that information out as you continue into the relationship to see how the person reacts. And if they react a certain way, you know what it is. We want to thank you, and thank you for tuning in to Unfiltered Unspoken. You have a blessed day.